Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep. Also, it is here to help you deepen in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. And if we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes and circles. And you can learn more about my services and offerings when you're awake tomorrow at illuminatingsouls.com. I also have a Facebook page of the same name, and I send out a daily inspiration email blast where you will receive an inspiring message from me every weekday. So there are lots of ways for us to connect outside of this podcast. But for now, I am here to help co-create a beautiful sanctuary of love where you can drift off to sleep surrounded by the love of your angels. If you're new to the world of angels, they are divine celestial beings. We all have them. But the relationship is designed to be subtle. So subtle, most of us don't even know that it is there. However, when we open our awareness to this divine love and the angels, they find ways to make their presence known. You may have heard about seeing repetitive numbers like 444 or 1111. You may see feathers in odd places. Those are just some of the ways. There are so many more. And I tend to think that it's a sign if it feels like a sign to you. You know, when you're driving in traffic and a paneled van pulls up next to you and it says Angels Plumbing or something like that. Part of the way we deepen in connection with angels is we become willing to see the signs of love and magic in the world. So I invite you to take a deep breath in and release. And you cozy on up and snuggle on in. Get your blankets and pillows just so, signaling to your body and your consciousness that it's time to start drifting off into that beautiful mystery of sleep. That time when we get to restore and replenish. So this episode is going to be about an hour, so you have plenty of time to drift off. My recommendation is that you turn the volume down low, almost so you have to reach to hear it. That way it can fade into the background and keep you company while you drift off. And if you need more than an hour, there are lots of episodes in the archive, so you can queue up a couple of them, and the angels and I can keep you company all night if need be. I also want to mention the podcast. I have set a schedule where I bring out a new episode every Wednesday and every Sunday. And this episode you're listening to is dropping on Sunday. It's episode number 38. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was a bonus episode that dropped on Friday. And that's because when I went to upload Sunday's episode, I hit the wrong button. So instead of scheduling, I hit publish now. And, it's like once you open the gate, it's out there. And I thought, okay, angels, someone must have needed that episode sooner rather than later. So if you go back to episode 37, there is a really beautiful message about self-love. And I hope it found you if you were the one the message was meant to find. I hope it found you. And if you haven't listened yet, I hope for those of you the message is meant for, it finds you in the right and perfect time. In this episode, I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes. It has to do with the power of your creative spirit and your uniqueness. I first found this quote in a Sark book. I don't know if you've ever read a Sark book, but if you haven't, you should. Sark is a wonderful, magical, creative author and teacher. Her books are brightly colored and whimsical and deep and reflect such a beautiful rainbow of our human experience. And in one of her books, maybe it was Succulent Wild Women, I don't remember which one, she included this quote, and it was the kind of quote that made me stop and take a deep breath and soak it into my bones. So I'm going to share it with you now. So this quote is by Martha Graham, the dancer and choreographer. It says, or she says, there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, and to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself or your work. You have to keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. Keep the channel open. So just breathe that in. And as I was getting ready to share this quote with you, I did a little bit of a deeper dive to see if I could find the context of this quote. And I did. There is a blog post from a website called The Marginillion. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but I'll put the link in the show notes because I want to give them a shout out. And the context of this was the choreographer and dancer Agnes DeMille. She was very famous for the work she did in Oklahoma, was feeling unsettled that she was getting so many accolades for Oklahoma and she didn't feel that it was her best work. So she was sitting down with Martha Graham, and that's when Martha Graham said this to her. And she includes this other part of the quote, which I think is so powerful. She says, "As for you, Agnes, you have so far used about a third of your talent." I want to share with you why I was guided to bring this quote to you tonight in this exchange. I almost didn't share with you who had inspired this quote, meaning Agnes DeMille, because it would be easy then to brush off the rest of the message, right? Well, she's Agnes DeMille. She's great. Of course, this quote applies to her. But truly, this quote applies to all of us. In each one of us, there is this creative, unique spirit. We have so deeply connected our creativity with this idea of mastery that we only have permission to be creative, to dance, to journal, to sing, if we're good at it. There is another wonderful story. I believe it's from Robert Fulghum. I've never been able to find the story again, but I think it's from him. He says, if you go into a kindergarten class and you ask the children, who here dances? Everyone would raise their hand. And if you asked, who here draws? Again, everyone's hands would go up. Same thing for singing. But if you revisit those children 10 years later, very few hands would go up because by that age stage, they have linked those gifts with mastery. So if I were to ask you, can you draw? Can you write? Can you dance? And can you sing? What would your answers be? Because I didn't ask if you can do those things well. So there's this vibrancy, this vitality, this life force, as Martha Graham says, within each one of us, which means it is within you. And there's a mystery in it. You know, I didn't know I was a writer until I was in my late 30s. I'm taking a deep breath because I didn't know I was going to share this story with you today. But okay, here we go. So the year 2000 was the year of my awakening. Many, many things happened to me that year. One of them was I reconnected with two dear friends, Judy and Luce. I used to work with them when I worked at the Samuel Goldwyn Company. So there's a podcast episode a ways back where I talk about my time at Goldwyn. And I loved these women. We were just the best of buds, and we had lost touch for a couple years, and Judy and Luce reached out to me. And we met at the Century City Mall, for those of you who know LA, after work one night. And we sat outside. And when I worked at Goldwyn, there was a freedom within me. I was very playful and adventurous, and not much about life intimidated me. I used to be the one that would circle up my friends, and we would go for a super long lunch. We would go out to Malibu, to Gladstone's, and have a margarita, and then go put our feet in the ocean before going back to work. Like, that's who I was. I was like, you guys, we have to go put our feet in the ocean and remember that we are alive before we come back to work. So there was a brightness to me back then. And as I was sitting there at that reunion meeting with Luce and Jude's in 2000, I was just sharing with them how I don't know where that part of me had gone. I'd forgotten that part of me. And Luce looked at me and she said, "Laurel, what happened to you? Where did you go?" And I just started to cry. I said, "I don't know, but I want to come back." And that was one of those moments of being cracked open. We get cracked open a lot on our journey of healing and awakening. So that was a sacred moment. So Luce had had breast cancer in the years that we had been out of touch. And that year she would wind up developing leukemia. So it's so interesting how all these dots connect. I can't believe I'm telling you this whole story, but it all connects back to this quote that I shared with you. So Judy and I were going to visit Luce. She was home resting. And remember how I mentioned Sark? Again, all dots connect. We don't ever know how these dots connect, but they do. And Sark's books are hand-lettered. She has a very distinctive handwriting. And so one of the things I find so enchanting about her books is that they're hand-lettered. So I was guided to get Luce a journal and some pens so she could write and draw because I was inspired by Sark. So we went to Michael's, which is where all good crafts are found in America. And at the time, gel pens had just come on the market. I mean, they're all over now, but back then they were new. And there was a journal with black paper. So the gel pens just leapt off the page, the inks, right? The bright colors. I was enchanted. I knew, I was like, I have to get this for Luce. And then I heard a voice. And the voice said, "You're sick too. Get some for you too." And I thought, And I did. I bought a second set. Everything I got for Luce, I got for myself too. And I started this habit of sitting down and writing in these journals. And again, inspired by Sark, who takes a deep, deep dive in everything she shares about herself. I gave myself permission to do a deep dive too, not having any idea what would pour out of me. And wow, did stuff pour out. It wasn't that typical, Dear Diary, today I had sushi for lunch. It was really deep and magical writing came out of me. I was stunned. I'd sort of look around and look at my dog and be like, where did that come from? How is that possible? That emerged from me. And that was part of my awakening. So I often say I didn't know I was a writer or an inspirer or a spiritual teacher until much later in life. But I found I was a writer by buying that set of gel pens and that journal with black paper and sitting down and not knowing where it would take me. So this quote is profoundly meaningful for me, and I'm hoping for you. Because yes, there are things over which we can develop mastery. If you have studied ballet for 12 years, for 20 years, you are a gifted dancer, and what a blessing you are in that. And for the rest of us, there's still joy that happens when we put on our favorite song and dance around the kitchen. That the part of the quote where she says to Agnes DeMille, "You have not even used 1/3 of your talent." When I was in my corporate job, this would have been about 2003 and 2004, so I'd already gone through USM and started to get a sense of where life was taking me, even though I didn't know the bold strokes. And I was working for a company that did market analysis for the entertainment industry. And it was a really good job. I got paid really good money. I worked with people I was friends with. I had great benefits. So often people will say, "Oh, I hate my job." And I didn't hate my job. It was a good job. If I had to have a job, it was a really good job. And I really liked the people that I worked with, and I liked the culture of the company I worked for. And I made a lot of money. And so I don't have any really horrible stories to say about my work in the corporate world. So I was really blessed. But I would sit in these meetings. I remember being in some of the meetings in our conference room. And I would often sit on the side of the big table. You know how conference rooms have the big tables. I would sit on the side of the table so I could look out the window. And it would look out over Hollywood. We were up on an upper floor, and so it was a good view. And I would often think to myself, I am not even using a percentage of my magic in this job. I had started to understand that there was magic in me. And I really wasn't using any of it in my job. I would get to use it on the weekends when I went to USM, the University of Santa Monica, or when I was with friends, or when I wrote in my journal. But there was this vitality, this life force, as Martha Graham says, that was in me, that wanted to be expressed in the world, and that if I did not express it, it would be lost forever because there was only one expression of me. And if this is true about me, this is true about you as well. That you have your version of this story. That you have had life experiences. You have risen from your knees to reclaim who you are. You are creative. You are empathic. You are wise. And there is a vitality and a life force that is unique to you. And it is yours to allow it to flow through you. Whether you share it with the world or not, will be up to you. But over the years, I have learned to say yes to this life force. That it's not my job to know its destination. I'm not responsible for knowing who's going to hear this message that I'm recording to you from underneath the blanket fort. Not my job to know. The angels know. God knows. Serendipity knows. But if I didn't follow the guidance to record this episode with this message for you, maybe in the exact moment that you need to hear it, who knows? But in this moment, I get to serve as an encourager for you, to help you remember the preciousness of your spirit, the power of your voice, of your creativity, of your vitality, of your life force. There is so much sacred energy flowing through right now for you, because your life has its own version of the connect the dots, like I just did for you today. from Sark to Goldwyn to my friends Luce and Judy to Martha Graham. It's amazing how all of these different moments of life weave together to create the tapestry of who we are. And you have your own version of this. I know it. You have moments when God has shown up even though you did not know it at the time. But as you reflect back, you go, oh, that was a God moment. And God is in the room right now. The angels are in the room right now with you, loving you, soothing you, helping you remember who you are. So take a breath in and release. And I always love to call the angels in every episode, and they're already here. But we'll do that now. So beautiful angels on high, we gather together right now in gratitude for your presence. We ask that you infuse this broadcast with love and light and healing, that everyone who finds their way to this message receives blessings from on high. Angels, we ask that you watch over each of the beloveds here, that you help them remember the beauty of their true spirit, the uniqueness, the vitality and the life force that moves through them into this world, making this world a better place. Angels, ask each of our beloveds here to get a good expanse of rest, the kind of rest that restores and replenishes, so that when they awake, they can feel more into their own inspired heart, knowing without a doubt that they are precious in this world. Angels, I am so grateful for this opportunity to be together here with you and the beloveds who are listening. Thank you for all of the moments of serendipity that made this moment happen. Thank you for all the molecules of life that are weaving together to bring us here and now. So, dear ones, just take another breath in and release, and allow the love and the blessings to pour over you. That in this moment, there's nothing you need to do or figure out. This broadcast is imbued with energy for you, loving, light-filled energy. Just let the presence of the divine be with you, and the angels will do the heavy lifting while you rest. So allow yourself to heal. Allow yourself to receive love, and allow yourself to be restored. And while you do, I'm going to read to you. So, since this is a bonus episode of sorts, I wasn't quite sure what to read to you, but truly my heart wanted to return to A Little Princess, because I love the next part of this story. So let me catch you up in case you haven't been hearing the episodes because you're sleeping, or maybe this is the first time you're listening to the podcast. So little Sarah Crew is at a boarding school in London. She and her father had lived in India, and her father still lived there. He was Captain Crew, And he was dashing and handsome and wealthy. And her mother had passed away, and Sarah was just the light of his heart. But as was done in the time, this would be the early 1900s, children were often sent to boarding school in London. So Captain Crewe takes Sarah to Miss Minchin's seminary, her boarding school. And Miss Minchin is an ornery, mean-spirited woman. But she loves money and class, so when Captain Crewe arrives with Sarah, he says she is to have the best of everything. And she is given that. The thing about Sarah is it would have been easy for her to have been a spoiled child because she was given everything. But what we discover in this book is that she is kind and generous and empathic. And she has a vivid imagination and is always sort of living in her imagination. And she's a great storyteller. Some of the other girls are mean girls and they're not nice to her, but she definitely has her circle of friends. And she has even become friends with the scullery maid, Becky, which back then, in terms of the classes, she should not have really given her the time of day, but in typical Sarah fashion, she feels that Becky has an unfair life. So this gives you some insight into Sarah. And then something very sad happens. Captain Crewe invested all of his money with a friend for gold mines. And it looks at that time like there is no gold, and he has lost his fortune, and he gets very, very sick and passes away. When Miss Minchin finds out, she wants to put Sarah on the street because now Sarah is a penniless orphan. There is nothing there for Miss Minchin to benefit from. But Captain Crewe's solicitor says that's going to look bad and walks out the door. So Miss Minchin realizes she's stuck with Sarah now, so she makes Sarah move up to the attic next to Becky and turns Sarah into a servant in her plainest clothes that she quickly outgrows. And Sarah begins to have a very dismal experience of life. In the attic, she and Becky pretend that they're prisoners in the Bastille. And Sarah makes friends with a mouse, actually a rat, who she calls Melchizedek. She is sent out on errands throughout London in horrible weather. And she's always living in her mind, in her daydreams. She's always noticing what's going on around her. The house next door to the seminary has been vacant for some time. And she dreams what it would be like if another family moved in next door. And she does find a family to become enchanted with. She calls them the large family because there are so many children. And she doesn't really know them, but she gives them all very fancy names. And she has a backstory for them. And she calls them the Montmorencys. And then one day, it seems that there's activity in the house next door. And it turns out that a very sick gentleman from India is moving in. And the papa of the Montmorencys works for him. So now the stars are aligning. And it turns out that this gentleman is from India. And he has a servant called Ram Dass. And Ram Dass moves into the attic across from Sarah. And he has a pet monkey. The monkey escapes and comes over to Sarah's attic. And so Ram Dass hops across the roof to retrieve the monkey, and they become friends. We then find out that the gentleman who is ill from India is Captain Crew's best friend, who Captain Crew thought lost all of his money, but it turns out there was gold. So this gentleman is sick of heart, sick of body, because he knows that Captain Crew had a daughter but doesn't know where she is. He is looking all over the world for her. Mr. Montmorency turns out to be his solicitor. He's heading off to Moscow to perhaps find her. Of course, not knowing that the little girl next door is Sarah. So Ram Dass shares with the gentleman about the little girl next door. And this is where we come to next in the story. So as I've said before, the story seems kind of sad, but I think the part as a child that enchanted me was that she daydreamed so much, which I really related to. I always was somewhere else in my mind. And just her kindness. So here we go. So this is chapter 14, What Melchizedek Heard and Saw. And again, Melchizedek is the rat she has made friends with. On this very afternoon, while Sarah was out, a strange thing happened in the attic. Only Melchizedek saw and heard it. He was so much alarmed and mystified that he scuttled back into his hole and hid there, and really quaked and trembled as he peeped out with great caution to watch what was going on. The attic had been very still all the day after Sarah had left it in the early morning. The stillness had only been broken by the pattering of rain upon the slates and the skylight. Melchizedek had, in fact, found it a rather dull, and when the rain ceased to patter and perfect silence reigned, he decided to come out and reconnoiter, though experience taught him that Sarah would not return for some time. He had been rambling and sniffing about, and had just found a totally unexpected and unexplained crumb left from his last meal, when his attention was attracted by a sound on the roof. He stopped to listen with a palpitating heart. The sound suggested that something was moving on the roof. It was approaching the skylight. It reached the skylight. The skylight was being mysteriously opened. A dark face peered into the attic. Then another face appeared behind it, and both looked in with signs of caution and interest. 2 men were outside on the roof, and were making silent preparations to enter through the skylight itself. One was Ram Dass. The other was a young man who was the Indian gentleman's secretary, but of course Melchizedek did not know this. He only knew that the men were invading the silence and privacy of the attic, and as the one with the dark face let himself down through the aperture with such lightness and dexterity that he did not make the slightest sound, Melchizedek turned tail and fled back to his hole. He was frightened to death. He had ceased to be timid with Sarah, and knew she would never throw anything but crumbs, and would never make any sound other than the soft, low, coaxing whistling. But the strange men were dangerous things to remain near. He lay close and flat near the entrance of his home, just managing to peep through the cracks with a bright, alarmed eye. How much he understood of the talk he heard I am not the least able to say, but even if he had understood it all, he would probably have remained greatly mystified. The secretary, who was light and young, slipped through the skylight as noiselessly as Ram Dass had done, and he caught a last glimpse of Melchizedek's vanishing tail. "Was that a rat?" he asked Ram Dass in a whisper. "Yes, "A rat, Sahib," answered Ram Das, also whispering. "There are many in the walls." "Oh," exclaimed the young man. "It is a wonder the child is not terrified of them." Ram Das made a gesture with his hands. He also smiled respectfully. He was in this place as the intimate exponent of Sarah, though she had only spoken to him once. "The child is the little friend of all things, Sahib," he answered. "She is not as other children. I see her when she does not see me. I slip across the slates and look at her many nights to see that she is safe. I watch her from my window when she does not know I am near. She stands on the table there and looks out at the sky as if it spoke to her. The sparrows come at her call. The rat she has fed and tamed in her loneliness. The poor slave of the house comes to her for comfort. There is a little child who comes to her in secret. There is one older who worships her and who would listen to her forever if she might. This I have seen when I have crept across the roof. By the mistress of the house, who is an evil woman, she is treated like a pariah. But she has the bearings of a child who is of the blood of the kings." "You seem to know a great deal about her," the secretary said. "All her life each day I know," answered Ram Das. "Her going out I know, and her coming in, her sadness, and her poor joys, her coldness and her hunger. I know when she is alone until midnight learning from her books. I know when her secret friends steal to her and she is happier, as children can be, even in the midst of poverty, because they come and she may laugh and talk with them in whispers. If she were ill, I should know, and I would come and serve her if it might be done. You are sure no one comes to this place but herself, and that she will not return and surprise us? She would be frightened if she found us here. The Sahib Carrisford's plan would be spoiled." Ram Das crossed noiselessly to the door and stood close to it. "None mount here but herself, Sahib," he said. "She has gone out with her basket and may be gone for hours. If I stand here, I can hear any steps before it reaches the last flight of stairs." The secretary took a pencil and a tablet from his breast pocket. "Keep your ears open," he said, and he began to walk slowly and softly round the miserable little room, making rapid notes on his tablet as he looked at things. First he went to the narrow bed. He pressed his hand upon the mattress and uttered an exclamation. "Hard as stone," he said. "That will have to be altered some day when she is out. A special journey can be made to bring it across. It cannot be done tonight." He lifted the covering and examined the one thin pillow. "Coverlet dingy and worn, blanket thin, sheets patched and ragged," he said. "What a bed for a child to sleep in, and in a house which calls itself respectable. There has not been a fire in that grate for many a day," glancing at the rusty fireplace. "Never since I have seen it," said Ram Das. "The mistress of the house is not one who remembers that another herself may be cold." The secretary was quickly writing on its tablet. He looked up from it and he tore off a leaf and slipped it into his breast pocket. "It is a strange way of doing things," he said. "Who planned it?" Ram Das made a modestly apologetic gesture. "It is true that the first thought was mine, Sahib," he said, "though it was naught but a fancy. I am fond of this child. We are both lonely. It is her way to relate her visions to her secret friends. Being sad one night, I lay close to the open skylight and listened. The vision she related told what this miserable room might be if it had comforts in it. She seemed to see it as she talked, and she grew cheered and warmed as she spoke. Then she came to this fancy, and the next day, the Sahib being ill and wretched, I told him of the thing to amuse him. It seemed then but a dream, but it pleased the Sahib. To hear of the child's doings gave him entertainment. He became interested in her and asked questions. At last he began to please himself with the thought of making her visions real things. You think that it can be done while she sleeps? Suppose she awakened, suggests the secretary. And it was evident that whatsoever the plan referred to was, it had caught and pleased his fancy as well as the Sahib Carrisford's. I can move as if my feet were of velvet, Ram Dass replied, and children sleep soundly, even the unhappy ones. I could have entered this room in the night many times, and without causing her to turn upon her pillow. If the other bearer passes to me the things through the window, I can do all and she will not stir. When she awakens, she will think a magician has been here. He smiled as if his heart warmed under his white robe, and the secretary smiled back at him. It will be like a story from the Arabian Nights, he said. It does not belong to London fogs. They did not remain very long, to the great relief of Melchizedek, who, as he probably did not comprehend their conversation, felt their movements and whispers ominous. The young secretary seemed interested in everything. He wrote down things about the floor and the fireplace, the broken footstool, the old table, the walls, which last he touched with his hand again and again, seeming much pleased when he found that a number of old nails had been driven in various places. You can hang things on them, he said. Ram Dass smiled mysteriously. Yesterday, when she was out, he said, I entered, bringing with me small sharp nails, which can be pressed into the wall without blows from a hammer. I placed many in the plaster where I may need them. They are ready. The Indian gentleman's secretary stood still and looked around him as he thrust his tablets back into his pocket. I think I have made notes enough. We can go now, he said. The Sahib Carrisford has a warm heart. It is 1,000 pities that he has not found the lost child. If he should find her, his strength would be restored to him, said Ram Dass. His God may lead her to him yet. Then they slipped through the skylight as noiselessly as they had entered it, and after he was quite sure they had gone, Melchizedek was greatly relieved, and in the course of a few minutes felt it safe to emerge from his hole again and scuffle about in the hope that even such alarming human beings as these may have chanced to carry crumbs in their pockets and drop one or two of them. Chapter 15. The Magic. When Sarah had passed the house next door, she had seen Ram Dass closing the shutters and caught her glimpse of this room also. It is a long time since I saw a nice place from inside, was the thought which crossed her mind. There was the usual bright fire glowing in the grate, and the Indian gentleman was sitting before it. His head was resting in his hand, and he looked as lonely and unhappy as ever. Poor man, said Sarah, I wonder what you are supposing. And this was what he was supposing at that very moment. Suppose he was thinking, suppose even if Carmichael traces the people to Moscow, the little girl they took from Madame Pascal's school in Paris is not the one we are in search of. Suppose she proves to be quite a different child. What steps shall I take next? When Sarah went into the house, she met Miss Minchin, who had come downstairs to scold the cook. Where have you wasted your time? She demanded. You have been out for hours. It was so wet and muddy, Sarah answered. It was hard to walk, because my shoes were so bad and slipped about. Make no excuses, said Miss Minchin, and tell no falsehoods. Sarah went into the cook. The cook had received a severe lecture and was in a fearful temper as a result. She was only too rejoiced to have someone to vent her rage on, and Sarah was a convenience as usual. "Why didn't you stay all night?" she snapped. Sarah laid her purchases on the table. "Here are the things," she said. The cook looked over them, grumbling. She was in a very savage humor indeed. "May I have something to eat?" Sarah asked rather faintly. "Tea's over and done with," was the answer. "Did you expect me to keep it hot for you?" Sarah stood silent for a second. "I had no dinner," she said next, and her voice was quite low. She made it low because she was afraid it would tremble. "There's some bread in the pantry," said the cook. "That's all you'll get this time of day." Sarah went and found the bread. It was old and hard and dry. The cook was in too vicious a humor to give her anything to eat with it. It was always safe and easy to vent her spite on Sarah. Really, it was hard for the child to climb the 3 long flights of stairs leading to her attic. She often found them long and steep when she was tired. But tonight it seemed as if she would never reach the top. Several times she was obliged to stop to rest. When she reached the top landing, she was glad to see the glimmer of a light coming under her door. That meant that Ermengarde had managed to creep up to pay her a visit. There was some comfort in that. It was better than to go into the room alone and find it empty and desolate. The mere presence of plump, comfortable Ermengarde wrapped in her red shawl would warm it a little. Yes, there Ermengarde was when she opened the door. She was sitting in the middle of the bed with her feet tucked safely under her. She had never become intimate with Melchizedek and his family, though they rather fascinated her. When she found herself alone in the attic, she always preferred to sit on the bed until Sarah arrived. She had, in fact, on this occasion, had time to become rather nervous, because Melchizedek had appeared and sniffed about in a good deal, and once had made her utter repressed squeal by sitting up on his hind legs while he looked at her, sniffing pointedly in her direction. "Oh, Sarah," she cried out, "I'm glad you have come. Melky would sniff about so. I tried to coax him to go back, but he wouldn't for such a long time. I like him, you know, but he does frighten me when he sniffs right at me. Do you think he would jump?" "No," answered Sarah. Ermengarde crawled forward on the bed to look at her. "You do look tired, Sarah," she said. "You are quite pale." "I am tired," said Sarah, dropping to the lopsided footstool. "Oh, there's Melchizedek, poor thing. He's come to ask for his supper." Melchizedek had come out of his hole as if he had been listening for her footstep. Sarah was quite sure he knew it. He came forward with an affectionate, expectant expression as Sarah put her hand in her pocket and turned it inside out, shaking her head. "I'm very sorry," she said. "I haven't one crumb left. Go home, Melchizedek, and tell your wife there was nothing in my pocket. I'm afraid I forgot because the cook and Miss Minchin were so cross." Melchizedek seemed to understand. He shuffled resignedly, if not contentedly, back to his home. And so, my friends, we're going to stop here. I just love how this story builds and builds. We'll come back to it, I promise, because the magic's about to happen. And so the angels and I wish you a blessed night's sleep. You dear ones, you are precious and you are loved. And I am deeply grateful for the gift of you. Thank you. Good night.